Now let's understand why selling gold is a red line. You see, selling hard assets for any government, any economy, isn't something you do lightly. Because once you start, the bottom of that barrel, the reserves, become pretty visible in terms of their limitation. You only have so much gold, and Russia has already burned through a significant proportion of it. The National Wealth Fund gold holdings have dropped from about 400 tons to just under 180. That's a collapse of roughly 57%. Before the invasion, that gold was considered untouchable and one of Russia's biggest comparative advantages. But now, according to recent intelligence assessments, the central bank may sell up to 230 tons of it, worth about $30 billion, and then a further 115 tons next year, about $15 billion. These are enormous liquidation figures for a country already running low on liquid reserves, and something that I've covered already in terms of what the budget will look like for the next 3 years and when Russia's going to get its money from. So why does it matter globally, though? Because long before you run out of gold, markets start believing and behaving as if you've already run out. Confidence evaporates, liquidity dries up, debt obligations spike, and critically, Russia becomes more dependent on asset sales rather than income, a shift that almost always signals the narrowing of the government's already pretty bad financial options. And the state therefore faces an impossible choice: print more money and risk runaway inflation, which they don't have a control on anyway, or cut spending and risk internal political instability. Now, Russia has leaned and learned on the limits of the first option. Inflation has eaten into the wages, interest rates have soared, and every sort of quiet printing operation has stolen a bit more purchasing power from ordinary Russians, particularly rural ones. Point being is that even autocracies know that people will notice. When inflation becomes a political problem, not just an economic one, then the Kremlin must pull the emergency brake if it hasn't got jammed already. And this is where the global context therefore sharpens the picture. Emerging market central banks have been purchasing gold at record levels, partly because of G7 discussions over confiscating Russia's $300 billion in frozen sovereign assets, $243 billion of which are held in Europe. I.e., Russia is selling gold into a world where everyone else is buying it, not because they want to, but because they have no alternative. That's exactly what selling gold is. It's the final lever they can pull before printing becomes outright dangerous and you leave from more of a sort of stagnant economy, as we saw in the 70s amongst parts of Europe, to just super hyperinflation. So the consequences of Moscow's fears are about a recruitment collapse. You see, there's a second consequence here, and this is the part that breaks the long-term war effort. Putin's entire strategy for sustaining the invasion of Ukraine has relied on paying extremely high military salaries and even higher death benefits. These can be in the realms of several thousands of USD, which is completely out of the realm of Russia, per month. These payments have made service not just attractive, but absolutely crucial to avoid mass conscription and ensure that the war machine goes. But if that money runs out, then what happens next? You can't recruit people for a grinding war with lower pay, weaker benefits, and the continually higher casualty rates, where taking a city of 60,000 is costing double that in troop numbers. So if Kremlin can't buy soldiers, it has one alternative: force them. And that's the scenario Putin has always avoided, because forced mobilization in full scale risks exactly what Putin and the Kremlin fear most: that internal stability. When Russia sells gold to keep paying inflated salaries, it isn't funding the war, it's funding the politics needed to allow the war to continue, for his legitimization and reputation to remain. So once gold runs out, recruitment cracks appear. Once recruitment cracks appear, battlefield pressure increases. And once battlefield pressure increases, Moscow begins looking for compromise terms disguised as victory. We've seen that already in the early signs of these peace negotiations and the fact that Russia hasn't really jumped on the bandwagon like Ukraine has, mainly because it doesn't have to, but also because Putin's wary of this longer-term issue. So now let's bring the two halves together. Oligarchs buying gold is a vote of no confidence in Russia's future. The Kremlin selling gold is an admission that it has no other financial levers left to pull. Those two signals, when they appear at the same time, always point to the same conclusion: a system approaching the limitations of its endurance, of its resilience, which I think we can agree has been more than many expected. Russia is not on the brink of collapse. That's too simplistic and something that I avoid on this channel. But it is running out of safe economic maneuvers. The war chest is largely depleted. Fiscal buffers are evaporating. Inflation politically sensitive, and recruitment incentives, the one biggest element sustaining it on the war front, becoming even more unsustainable. So elite confidence, the confidence that matters most for Putin, is drying up. So you see why the gold story matters. Not because gold itself determines the war, but because gold as a physical asset is the final undisguised indicator of a state's true financial stress. The Kremlin is telling the world, not through speeches or propaganda, but through its policy, through its undisclosed, unannounced actions, that its room for maneuver is shrinking, and that the oligarchs are responding exactly as you'd expect. They're getting out before the music stops.